Welcome, everyone. I'm Grzymala-Busse. I'm the director of the Europe Center, and it's our great pleasure today to welcome Michele Groppi, who is a lecturer in the Defense Studies in the Defense Academy of the UK, where he coordinates the policy and strategy module. He's also the founder and president of the International Team for the Study of Security, Verona. And this is a homecoming of sorts, since Dr. Groppi got his BA in International Relations here at Stanford. He's a specialist in the study of terrorism, extremism, and radicalization. And so today we will welcome him to represent on Dark Souls, the rise of the far right in Europe. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Director. Everyone, welcome, and thank you very much. Let me just start by saying that it is an incredibly big honor for me to be back here because I was a student, I was an athlete, I was Professor Schultz's student, and as I was telling him 2 days ago, he's still being punished because after 15 years later, I still bug him, and therefore, Professor, thank you very much again, and welcome everyone. Today is a very special day also for Italians. Are there any Italians in the room?
Honorary Italians?
Oh, yeah, honorary Italians, fantastic. Because today on April 25th, we celebrate the liberation from Nazi fascism. And today is a day of incredibly big political controversy. And so, especially with the current government and so on and so forth. And so delivering this talk right now here at Stanford for me is even a double meaning, of course. Before we start, however, I would like to show this to you just to set the scene. So it worked before, so hopefully we will. Let me see. What? No.
Exactly.
It used to work before, right? Right? So we did this before. Anyway, if you're not making it work, no worries. I will send you the link. So I'm just gonna tell you what this is. So this one is so with just 40 minutes, right? So apology. So 40 seconds of Italian neo-fascist saluting. So just doing like the run, but very, 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 very scary, right? So so the translation would be like, to all the fallen comrades, present! And this, right? But so hard and so strong throughout a number of years. And this would be the footage. No worries, I will share the link like with you so you can see. Same thing in London, or not same thing in London, but so here, this happened a few weeks ago, actually, and I happened to be in there. If you zoom closely, I was actually there, like right with the police. No, but jokes aside, I was in the city, right? So, and here the far right got in a number of fights and riots with the police protesting, not only like pro-Palestinian activists, but in general, just say, we're losing our country, and so on and so forth. And so, why did I want to show these two videos? Because this is something that is growing in Europe, and it is worth absolutely studying. What are we going to do today? Actually, we're going to take a step back, and I will very briefly explain to you why we at King's College London and ITSS Verona wanted to do this study and how we did that. Nevertheless, there are some paramount clarifications to be made, right? So because this is a very sensitive topic, and therefore, like as I explain the aims of the study, I just would like those to be very crystal clear. Then we're going to conceptualize very briefly. No worries, I'm not going to bore you like with all the theories and all that. What is far right? What is not far right? All that, but at least our conceptualization of far right. Then we're going to move on how we actually we did the study just by running over a few logical bits, and then finally the meat on the bone, the core of the thing. So our main findings. So just touching upon the general characteristics of the far right groups, the narratives and the trends which I find so particularly interesting. Then we're going to mention very quickly what we believe are the threats and the risks, and then we're going to conclude with some policy recommendations, leaving time for questions and so on and so forth. So as I was telling you, let's take a step back. I have the privilege also here to be accompanied by retired Lieutenant Colonel Mr. John Williams. So here, John is from the US Department of State. And so, and he is the liaison or the lead liaison. So he's working within the Department of State and so the various US military institutions. And so with ITSS Verona, we started talking about a potential study, and so mapping of the rise of the far right in Europe with John. And thanks to John, we in the end did, and we presented the findings, I think, when was that? 3 months and a half ago, like, or something like this, online, right? So with the members of the US Department of State, its Counterterrorism Bureau, the FBI, the CIA, USAID, and members of the Indo-Pacific Command. Why? Because of this, right? So because this is a common issue, right? So this is a right, so that we are also experiencing here in this country, and our interest peaked, right? So following the infamous Capitol Hill's events. Nevertheless, as I said, a number of clarifications are absolutely due at this point. Number one, we should not, and we do not, with this report, we do not want to be making any sweeping and big generalizations. Right? So we're not stigmatizing anyone, right? So the far right or the right in general. Well, you know, we have to be very careful. What is the letter? Right? So how do we conceptualize this? It is very complicated, and therefore everything that we say should be taken with caution. In doing that, as I was saying, we do not want to marginalize, discriminate, or stigmatize anybody, especially because political dissent is very legitimate. It's the heart of what we cherish so much, which is democracy, of course. Nevertheless, no, that shouldn't make us shy away from producing fact-based analysis, right? So of these selected groups. And why do we want to do that? Because we want to enhance the debate, right? Listing concrete courses of actions so that in this case, the US government, because remember, so all of this project that was born out are informal but fruitful friendship and relationship with people like John. And so that how the United States, and so government in this case, could tackle a rising issue in Europe, right? So because Italy, France, UK, key US allies, right? And given what is happening, Ukraine, Russia, the Middle East, but in general, well, Washington has a big interest in, please, I'm not saying this any arrogantly, right? So, but understand what's going on in Europe, and then from there doing something together to mitigate the issue. So this is why we are doing the study, or we have done the study. Now, how do we conceptualize far right? I promise, right? So I'm not gonna bore you. I mean, so we like too much with all the theories and the definitions, and no. That said, no, defining the hard right is just hard. I mean, so for those of us, so those of you, right, so defining other political terms, ideologies, and something, we know how difficult this can be, right? I come from the counterterrorism domain. I tried to find jihad, trying to find terrorism. We could lose months and months and years and years, so just talking about the definitions. Nevertheless, there are three main observations or pieces of consideration that I would like to do. First one is just obviously context matters, right? So the far right is not a monolithic entity, right? So no, context matters, and it shapes what we then consider to be like far right. There are significant differences between groups, and guess what? A number of the groups that even we have examined do not even consider themselves to be far right. And it makes sense. I'm pretty sure that you have heard one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Well, you know, there's definitely like some commonality here. And please keep this point in mind, because towards the end of the presentation, we're going to come back with this, and I'm going to actually put an example here just showing this particular aspect. Nevertheless, we still have to land this. I mean, so we still have to find something that we can use to conceptualize what we are exploring right now. And therefore, I I think that it would be very important to highlight at least three common elements according to the research conducted by Mudd and Golder. First thing first, nativism. So what does the far right really believe in, right? So nativism, right? So which is a combination of nationalism and xenophobia. So meaning where I am born matters. Jus sanguis, right? So nationality, tradition, sense of belonging being linked to where you are born. Okay, so so the blood, right? So this is really, really important. Populism, so meaning the voice of the people. We are the real deal. We know what the real people want, and we are the voice of it. And then obviously authoritarianism, meaning a strict interpretation of law and order. Obviously, their law and their vision of order, but still, right? So a strict authoritarian interpretation of it. So these are the three common elements that we can absolutely start our conversation from. Now,
Is it okay to interrupt with a question or not?
What
It's short. It's just, where's the dividing line between right and far right?
Very good. This is very, very, very interesting. And in fact, it's one of the restrictions, right? So that I would like to talk about, but very shortly. No. I will absolutely answer your question. So here, the threshold, right? So is when the political discourse translates into an active destabilization of the basic democratic values, right? In that, in certain cases, even justification and active engagement in violence. So obviously, Alvin asked a very good question, right? So because, wait a second, where do we draw the line? Are we criminalizing the right? Absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. But when we go beyond, right? So in this case, right? So what the right says, and that entails, kick all the immigrants out, right? So no rights for them, or the weaponization, as we're going to see, of a number of things. So religion, history, the military, right? So which could potentially destabilize the democratic system. That's where we included, and we made the transition. So that said, what do we look at? What is our sample? So we look at Italy, Spain, France, UK, Germany. We inserted Ukraine and then Russia. And you may wonder, whoa, wait a second. Why these countries? Well, okay, I'm going to be very honest with you. There have been a number of restrictions and limitations. Let me briefly walk you through those. So first thing first, remember, this was conducted by my team at ITSS Verona. And so we allocated one either native, speaker, a native national to each country, right? Which then we coupled with a country expert from that country. However, in certain instances, we were not able to do that, and I will shortly elaborate upon this point. And we started this project before, or at least conceptually, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but we still wanted, just to add another layer of analysis. And so it was a mere unfortunate coincidence, right? So that the war happened, right? So, but it did impact our research. I will show you this. Initially, we have envisioned and we wanted to analyze more countries. What about Hungary, right? And so it would have been a brilliant case studies. What about Sweden? What about the Netherlands? And so on and so forth. However, and I want to make this very crystal clear, right? So there have been a number of limitations, and therefore, please take everything I say and then everything that is in the report with a grain of salt, right? So, and in a constructive way, because this is not the whole picture, because we didn't manage to get the whole picture. We got threatened in a number of instances. We wanted to do Hungary, we started doing that. My researcher got threatened. I pulled her out. I said, there's no way that we're going, right? In a number of instances, we self-censored. So meaning that people were afraid. It's like, look, I know so many of them that if my name appears or any of this, I'm going to get in trouble. spirituality. And so it's self-centered. Last but not least, and we're going to see this, you may wonder, especially if you read the report, or if you want, so just to access the report, well, but even the groups that you selected, well, what's wrong with that? Well, we wanted to select more groups, but we experienced political pressure. And so we ended up focusing mostly on non-party entities, right? But there are big party entities, and so still in the study. And so if you take a look at the report, you will see that in some countries that we did go there, right? So and we did so, for instance, in France, in so Marine Le Pen, but we didn't do that in Italy because I got a call like from Rome and say, "Don't you dare equating blah 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 with it," and so we didn't, right? So what is the point of all this discussion? This is not the whole picture, but it's a starting point. It's something that is still valuable to pique interest and to further debate. So this is very, very, very important. That said, we have taken a look at three main areas, right? So the first one being the domestic and the territorial dimension. So how are these groups organized? So in the territories, so in the various countries. What do they believe in? So what are their driving narratives? And then last but not least, what are the potential threats to US interests in Europe? Remember, we did this in friendship with the US Department of State, and therefore our conclusions were tailored to what Washington could be doing back in the old continent. We did this through mainly, right? So like content analysis of online, groups and channels. So we ended up surveying 21 groups. We examined about 5,000 posts, mainly on Twitter, X, and Telegram. But even here, we wanted to do more, but we couldn't penetrate. And so a number of closed groups on Facebook and other channels and so on and so forth. Please, do not get me wrong. We did everything legally, everything that was ethically approved. We're not the police or the Secret Service, right? So, but even having access, to some of the material, as you can imagine, was hard, right? That said, we try to complement what we have seen with semi-structured interviews with country experts, and that's how we try to mitigate at least some of the things. Now, don't worry, you don't have to take a look at this, right? So, but this is just a very brief outline of the groups that we have examined. So 3 per country. Now here the only reason why we didn't put the gray walls here in Germany is because they don't have media channels, or at least we weren't able to access. The ones that we were able to find. But in the report we have presented for each of these groups, in a very consistent manner, as I was saying, how they are organized. Right, then what do we live in, and then what do they do, and what are the potential risks for the United States. Anyway, now, as promised, meat on the bone. What are the main findings? So the first one, I told you, we focused on the general characteristics of the groups, and so in general, right. So then I will go a little more specific. But if we are to make some comparisons, well, in terms of followers, our sample included some bigger party entities, and therefore, in terms of followers, we have seen groups with large portions of the electorate, right? So the Front National in France, so for instance, so just to name one, to a few hundreds, right? So just like in Italy, for instance. In terms of leadership, these groups tend to like the strong leader. I'm not going to be saying strong men, because there are strong women too, but in general, a strong white male. And so, generally speaking, sometimes with a history of violence, right? In other instances, with very marked political activism. But the thing that distinguishes them is that they are considered quote unquote, strong. What about the funding? Where did you gather funding from? Generally speaking, donations. In some cases, we have even seen illicit or shady businesses. And in other cases, right, so which is a source of a very heated debate, foreign interference, such as, the Russian attempt and actually, successful support or financial support of a number of groups. What about the violence? Are they violent in general? Well, they try not to advocate for violence openly. Why? Because that is illegal, right? But they do engage in sporadic acts of violence. Certain contexts are more troublesome than others. I will zoom in on one of those shortly. Are they connected internationally? Well, it's interesting because some of them compete, and it's natural. They need to be the big dog, so they need to compete for primacy and for all of that. But they do not shy away. Yes, they do forge friendships, cross-border connections. And we have seen that the politically established or more politically established entities, they do have those, but they're more so-called normalized. Instead, the non-political entities, oh yeah, they're very proud about their extremist and fascist connections all over the world. Right, so we will see that. How do they operate? So generally speaking, they are huge in the social media, right? And that's where most of their activities happen. But they do not shy away from political rallies and particularly hooliganism, right? So a number of far-right groups are tight with soccer, right? And they travel. So they're just waiting for big games all over Europe to actually unite and ride the police and do all sorts of things. But who is the target in general? So especially on their message, right? Well, young generations, kind of like, so for those of you who have studied the so-called Salafi or Islamist or Wahhabi or jihadist radicalization, it's interesting, right? So again, young generations and particularly the disenchanted working class, which is so interesting because the far left used to do this, and now we're seeing somewhat of a shift, right? No, so they're saying the left doesn't do anything for you. See, they left you there. We are the ones right now who can solve your problems. So see, in general, these are the main general things that we have observed. Now, very interesting. What do they believe in? So, racist stuff. So, but before we do, another important premise. The far right in Europe, as I was saying, they are heterogeneous, and sometimes they even contradict each other, right? So we have to be very careful. For instance, are they all white supremacists? No, most of them are, but some of them don't even talk about race in these terms. What about homophobic messages? Yes, but some other people tend to play it down, so play it cool. What about fascism and Nazi nostalgia, right? Oh, some people, yes, and they're incredibly proud about it, but others, no, they don't have Nazi symbols or anything like that, right? So keep this in mind, right? So we cannot overgeneralize. That said, what do we see? That in general, all groups, right? So pretty much, again, be very careful. Right? So we cannot overly generalize, but for the most part, we have seen that most groups are nationalist and populist in nature. And so I told you. So we are, so the big ones. So the big dogs. They are against immigrants, and they believe in the great replacement theory, right? So we were born here. We have our roots here. But all of this is being taken away, right? The immigrants are going to replace us, and we need to defend this. We need to defend the nation state. We need to defend the culture. We need to defend all of this, because if not, we're going to disappear. Now, there are still other racist ideologies. So virtually all groups are Islamophobic in nature, and almost all of them are anti-Semitic, right? So in nature, very, very heavily. Again, almost all of them tend to weaponize a number of cultural matters. in particular religion, and the role that the traditional family so can play, mom and dad, right? So that type of thing. Almost all of them are anti-system, and this is actually, in my opinion, where it gets very, very, very interesting. Anti-US, anti-NATO, and anti-EU. So that thing, the nation state comes before everything. Everything else, right? So which goes beyond the state level is bad, right? Because we are slaves, so to the system. This is the narrative. Last but not least, my favorite ones, the conspiracy theories. It's all about the elites. The elites control the world, particularly the Jews. COVID, it was something which was man-created, and it was used once again to control us, such as the 5G and all the other forms of technology, which are meant to limit, for instance, viability, data exchange, and so on and so forth. So here, there's all these conspiracy theories, right? So placing them as the victims, right, to start with, but also paving the way for their political narrative of liberation. All right. Now, as promised, I still have probably like 6 or 7 more minutes to go. I really would like to zoom very quickly on a number of countries. Now, team, everyone, I do not have time. It's all in the report, right, to focus on everything. So we have selected something that we deemed interesting for each country. Obviously, in Italy, right, so all far-right groups, right, so as you can imagine, are fairly nostalgic, right? So this one is Predappio, so where Mussolini was born, right? And every single year they get together, right? So, and they chant and they do this and they go visit his tomb, right? So in Italy, right, the 3 major groups that we have examined are heavily fascist. And this is big because our constitution, I am originally Italian, forbids fascism. Fascism is outlawed, so it's unconstitutional. That said, like now and then, like, so these groups do this. Spain, Falange, España, and all the groups that we have examined seem to be more focused on the protection of traditional values and really despise the LGBT plus community. And therefore, this is what struck us. So in addition to everything else, but there's a particular, like, even morbid focus on this. What about France? So many things that could be said, but we selected the anti-NATO and anti-EU rhetoric, particularly by Front National. So here, for instance, like Marine Le Pen, here, I don't know if you can see this, but she said, like, choisir la France, choose France. Yes, we are one of the most important countries in Europe, but Europe is holding us back, something very similar to what, and I was there, to what we heard with Brexit, right? So something very similar. And in fact, maybe not so coincidentally, maybe, I don't know, Russia has been supporting that particular group. And so see, is this a coincidence? Discuss. So we're not going there, but we can see like this big anti-NATO, anti-US, anti-EU rhetoric, which is, or at least it seems to be supported by Russian banks. Now, back in my new country, so the United Kingdom, once again, so many things that could be said, right? So, but here, one of the things that really strikes us is the entity of the anti-Islam discourse. So this is Britain first, right? And again, very linked to the great replacement theory. We are losing England, they are replacing us, and we have to take our country back. I'm not sure that you can see this here, but here it said Britain first, taking our country back. So rule Britannia. And here particularly, I live in London or between London and the Defense Academy. Believe me, right? So you can feel this tension in the streets, right? So it's pretty big. What about Germany? I do not mean to be offensive or anything like this, but I said, all right, beer, kebab, and Hitler. Why? What is the thing? Well, because for instance, like the autonomous nationality, so this group, right? So the the autonomous nationalists, right? So in English, they really strike me. And you know why? Because they remind me of the Red Brigades. They use the exact, so the Red Brigades was, well, we still have them, but so like was, so back in the days, a far left communist Italian terrorist organization. They use the same rhetoric, and they say the struggle is not over with. We're still occupied. So by the West, by the United States, and the only thing that we can do is to fight them. So they are the only ones, arguably, right? So in the German context, to actually, feeling fairly proud, like of their Nazi past, and using their tactics. In fact, I selected them because they tend to be violent, right? Fairly openly, right? So which in Germany, you can imagine how this could be, so fairly problematic. Now, why did I say kebab? Because what about the Grey Wolves? Right? So, because they are in Germany, but they have a lot of Turkish members that, in fact, like the Grey Wolves, right? So, and this is their symbol, is actually linked, to Turkey, right? So even Turkish officers fighting with Hitler, right? And nowadays they operate a lot in Germany. They they infiltrate demonstrations. They are heavily anti-Semitic, and guess what? They have ties with whom? Iran, right? So which is another interesting, actor, India, which is trying to expand its grapple in Germany. And John, I don't know if you remember this, but the FBI a number of months ago dismantled a terrorist Iranian cell, right? So in Germany. Now, once again, please, nobody get offended, right? So, and be very careful because the situation is unfolding as we're speaking, right? And by the way, just for the record, we got insulted, even by professors, right? So here, because we tried, to study this, and one even said that we were tools of the Kremlin and paid by the Kremlin. And I said, I wish. So, no, we're still poor, right? So we don't have the kind of money, I wish. Right? No, but jokes aside, so we did manage eventually to examine Ukraine. And remember that at the very beginning, I asked you to remember the fact that not all far-right groups are the same, right? So the context matters, and some of them contradict each other. This is what's happening in Ukraine, because we have the right sector, which is openly, so far right, and fairly naturally in this moment, very nationalist. So Slavo Ukraino, right? All against the Russians. Good. But then we have the Spartan Italian, right? Which is fairly pro-Russian, right? So still far right, but pro-Russian. And then we have my favorite, right? So the Pizrak Brigade, which is, so still a pro-Russian. But is it really, or can it be really considered as a far-right group? They don't see it that way. There are some members, like from the far right, but we even have communists, with them, and people who do not really fit, so probably like this category, right? So, and our Ukrainian professor, expert said, well, see, so this is a patent case, right? So of the heterogeneous nature of the far-right group. And then here, for instance, we had one group, so in Russia, right? So with again, anti-EU, anti-NATO, but the thing that I really would like to emphasize is that this particular group glorifies Trump, right? Which is which is big, which is very interesting, especially as the upcoming elections are not, in fact, like too far away. Now, before I conclude, right, so I'm running slightly late, but I do want to leave time for discussion and questions. Which risks? So, given everything we said, given everything that we have seen, what are the risks here? We believe, right? So, according to our study, according to our experts in the field, that there is no real immediate threat to democracy, right? So especially in so-called like Western Europe. So we do not foresee like a takeover or anything like this like for the moment. We have to be very careful in Ukraine and Russia because we don't know what is going to happen in Ukraine. They are fighting and they're heavily armed, and well, and neither do we know what is going to happen in Russia, particularly, right? So in a number of years, should the state collapse? Are these groups going to take over? Because interestingly enough, yeah, they hate the Jews, yeah, they hate the West, yeah, they hate X, Y, Z, but who also do they hate? Oligarchs. And how Putin has been handling a number of things. So what's going to happen when Putin eventually is going to, not be there anymore? Again, discuss, right? So we don't know, but at least for the moment, in the other countries, Italy, France, Spain, UK, Germany, no immediate threat. However, we are seeing that the normalization of more extremist narratives, which in the long run could be problematic, right? So no country or of the examining ones, so that we did, can say we don't have an issue with this. No, we do. We do, right? So maybe it's very little now, and it should be monitored. Very quickly, what should Washington do? So given everything that we said, and we pondered over these bits with both with the experts and with the US Department of State. So in pillar one, as we called it, well, try to create task forces and committees to monitor, the situation. How's the situation developing? We cannot shy away from this. Pillar number two, right? So create, again, networks of aligned stakeholders, right? So just to create something, right, so that we can absolutely put there in the field without, and this is pillar number three, forgetting about, all these prevention programs, right? So, and involve civic and education initiatives. And then last but not least, right, we should try to adapt, so as much as possible, because the situation is absolutely changing. Ukraine is still there. And how the war one day is going to end may have a huge impact on this, right? The US elections, and here like we didn't put it, but what about the Israeli-Hamas war, right? So there is another matter we should be absolutely paying attention to. So in conclusion, as I said before, we do not and cannot be making this big sweeping generalizations, because context matters. It's important. Far right in Italy is very different than far right in Ukraine, which is different than far right in the United Kingdom. There may be no direct threat to democracy, but spurs of radicalizations, as we call them, do emerge. And in the long run, US interests may be impacted, right? And in spite of difficulties, we should continue this monitoring, debate, and engagement, even though, and here I would like to provoke you with, it's hard. We're strapped for cash, right? So, and actually, to what extent should Washington intervene? Right? So, because if Washington intervenes too much, then isn't Washington reiterating or somewhat reaffirming the narrative put forward by the extreme right? Say, see, we told you. See, it means World War II is not ended. We're still under US control. So where do we strike the balance? How do we strike the balance? And how do we communicate? Questions, complaints, threats, calls for repatriation. In England, at this point, it's actually, yeah, we'll lock you up. Please, sir.
No threats.
All right, good.
I promise. A series, really, of questions having to do with conceptualization of the project. So first of all, the Washington part. I mean, are you funded by the U.S. government?
No, we're not.
You're not funded. So it's just a cooperation effort. Okay. I mean, that's an important question. You should answer that in the beginning, especially, if you talk about ties with Washington. That also leads to another question. Why not more with the EU? Why not more even with NATO? In other words, this is a fundamentally European problem. I mean, we got our own problem, right, with the right and with the far right, and that we have to deal with. I mean, this is fundamentally a European problem, but let me leave that aside. So the two other questions, again, with conceptualization, you're talking about far right, and some of the far right are fascist or more fascist, less fascist, but you're sort of avoiding, in some ways, it seems to me, something that you might call neo-fascism in Europe, and how you deal with the phenomenon of neo-fascism, which itself, I I don't know, I wasn't with you when you conceived this, but makes more sense to me in some ways than far right, because far right, I mean, is just right of the right, right? I mean, that's it. That's so if you could talk a little bit about how you think about fascism, and that's related to the final question, which has to do with Eastern Europe, which you're leaving out. And you mentioned why, there were individuals and people threatened and this and the third thing and the fourth thing. But it strikes me that if you think about Europe and you think about neo-fascism, then you think about Poland, you think about Hungary, you think about Slovakia, you think about Croatia, you think about Romania. None of those are included. And Eastern Europe is, after all, a big chunk of Europe. And Russia and Ukraine, I mean, you mentioned you were going to do this before the war, but it's still so idiosyncratic now and hard to, how to do any kind of serious research in Russia, for Pete's sake. I mean, so those are my kind of remarks about the structure of the project.
Thank you. So let me address the first one. So at the very beginning, we did, sit down and said, all right, what we're looking at, right? So because here we could end up in so many directions. And how are we calling it? Are we calling this, again, like far right? Are we calling this alt-right? Are we just focusing more like on neo-fascist and neo-Nazism and all that? So just conceptually speaking, so we just went back to what we thought would be the more inclusive term, right? So which is being used even at a governmental level, but knowing, and in fact, like this is in the report, sir, that there is some absolute validity in what you're saying and what we call degree of vagueness, right? So because we've seen that some groups are legitimate neo-fascist. Right? So in Italy and in other countries, it's just about being neo-fascist. In other realities, fascism is almost not even mentioned, right? So after all, and there is a big difference. And so just to answer your question, so we just reverted to what we thought to be just the more inclusive term, but is it just semantics? Some people say yes, some people say no. But the point being, and I'm answering the second question, this is just a starting point. Much more research has to be done. And yes, we are doing research now with NATO and even with the EU. But as we say in my language, no one is a prophet at home. When I did approach other governmental entities, they weren't interested, But, if we get like the US Department of State, and now they're going to listen to us, right? So even if it isn't perfect, even if we weren't able to get those countries, but because I did it, so we did this with the team that I have. We are a lot of people, but I didn't want to put a Portuguese studying Slovakia, right? And so I just went with the people who obviously were good, right? So and were qualified from those countries within our network. So there's just a mere logistical thing. But we were supposed, and it's a good thing that you mentioned that we did have a Polish researcher, but she just didn't want to do it. What a pity. In Hungary, we started, and as you say, that she got legitimately threatened, and I called her out. I said, "You're not doing this anymore. Let's just leave it." And we just had to desist. But you're absolutely right. The thing that we really wanted to do, for instance, Serbia, we wanted to do Bulgaria, we wanted to do even Greece, right? So the Balkans are incredibly important. Romania, Poland, right? So we know that we're missing, and therefore we have focused more like on the size, but it wasn't intentional. So or it wasn't politically driven, right? So so we're just gonna do Western Europe because it's better or anything like that. So there were like some logistical big like restrictions, but point taken, sir. Right. So as I said, this is not the full picture. This is the starting point, but something that we can use to enhance the debate. So just moving forward. But thank you, sir.
Can I add something too? Also, sir, so to provide some clarification. Michele is very nice to go ahead and mention the State Department, was kind of like the one, all we did, so that you understand.
Yeah.
The State Department works in concert because we focus on the world at large, not domestically. He wanted to talk not only, domestically, he also wanted to talk about the world at the same time. So who do we work with? Homeland Security, and then also the FBI, because that's who focuses here with inside the US. With inside the State Department, Counterterrorism Bureau, because I'm part of the Counterterrorism Bureau, or was previously, we work hand in hand with Homeland Security as part of a group that's better known as the REMV working group. And we have weekly or monthly discussions focusing on threats, not only here at home, but also abroad. And so we look at how there's these type of synergies between different organizations, different groups. REMV stands for Radically Ethically Motivated Violent Extremists. So that's how we tie the two together. So just for clarity.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for coming and for sharing this research. I was really intrigued by the finding on cross-border connections. And I'm curious what that looked like and if these far-right parties are vocal and open about their cross-border connections, because I imagine that it doesn't look great for a highly nationalist party to be extremely vocal about cooperating with other far-right international parties.
Great question. So, and thank you for that. So, as I was saying before, some are very, very, very vocal about it. Yeah, we are in touch with the brothers or comrades, right? So in this case, in XYZ, right? And they're very proud of it, right? So especially when they are soccer games, right? So, or something like this. Marine Le Pen, Meloni, Alternative for Deutschland, something like that. Yes and no, right? And for obvious reasons, right? So as you can imagine. However, we are seeing certain groups competing with each other. It makes sense, right? So because they have to fight for primacy, whereas others, no, they share even intelligence, right? So, or, so we have to be very careful. In terms of the US, we have seen, so the RIM, the RIM group in Russia, getting in touch with very important people, or fairly, right? So is important people here in the United States, in Charlottesville, right? So, right, and so just forging, so these transatlantic connections, and even training them in guerrilla warfare, so tactics, mob infiltrations, and something like that. And you know what? They study, and this is also something, so that I say when I do, right? So or when I illustrate my studies in counterterrorism, Al Qaeda, Daesh, Hamas. Let us never forget, everyone. We study them. They're not stupid. They study us, and they learn from each other whenever they can, whenever they have an opportunity. Right? So we should never underestimate something like this, right? And therefore, to answer your question, very final point. In a number of instances, we saw that this these sort of cross-border links are very fruitful, right? So they talk business. So it's not that they just get together and eat. They do that too, and then maybe they go to the game together. But sometimes they just are not an operational meeting, right? So in which they actually learn from each other. So just like we do, right? So they share lessons and they move on, they evolve. They are not vocal about violence so much on Facebook because they can get in trouble, and so they engineer other ways to put forward the same message, but by using other words, so that a lawyer cannot really get on their case, for instance, right? So, and this came out of meetings, for instance.
Can I add something to that as well?
Please.
One of the other things that we've seen with QAnon, everybody always thinks that's a US threat. There are also cells in Germany, in France, and also in Australia, New Zealand. And they're already cross-bordering communications. Some of the things that we've also seen is that they're either talking on games, video games, or they're even participating in MMA matches. So they're going ahead. So we jokingly say there's online and offline ways of recruiting. And that's basically what they're doing.
Thank you. Ken, and then.
So this actually is just a small point that you'd mentioned about not all of them, some of them are proud of like a Nazi heritage and others less so. So so in the US, right, we observe this phenomenon of people in the North who fly Confederate flags. But I'm just wondering, like, so, but there's a more complicated history in Europe with Nazism and fascism. Do you see Nazi flags in France, or those, or is that like a bridge too far for the far right there?
Ken, this is an excellent question. And actually, so you mentioned France, but let me tell you about the United Kingdom. Let us never forget that the Brits and the Americans and many others died in Italy. I have the privilege, and other parts obviously of the front, but I have the privilege, right, so to teach their grandsons, so for the most part, right? And it's very fascinating. So in huge generalization. So please just bear with me. But just to make a point, it's something very dear to their heart. I'm not saying that. So there are neo-Nazis and neo-fascists in Britain. Of course there are. But waving the Nazi flag, right? So or fascist symbols, it's something that culturally speaking, no, because it goes against what they are trying to say. Get Britain back, but what? The Britain that fought against fascism, right? And therefore, it's so weird. It's so interesting because in Italy and in Germany, woof, it's all about that, right? So fascist memorabilia, right? So I have a friend who sells that thing because it's so profitable. Not so, right? So can you believe it? But in England, I'm not sure about France, but just focusing on there, it would be like shooting yourself on the foot. Sadly, I didn't, so I don't know why it didn't work, but the second video that I was about to show, do you know what those guys were doing? They were protesting, not just pro-Palestinian protesters, but where were they? In front of memorial, right? So in front of this monument, right, literally standing by Whitehall, so the British Parliament, well, not British Parliament, but the British government, in memory of whom? Of their troops, dying when? During World War II. So, see, so you see like how this would not sit well. No? Even though there are obviously, but the bigger groups, nope, they cannot do anything like this. In Italy, it's a totally different story. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your insights. Actually, your last response connected to the question I was hoping to ask, which is earlier in your presentation, you mentioned something very interesting, which is that young people tend to be one of the primary target audiences for the social media marketing that is done by far-right groups. And I wanted to ask how effective you think that is, and whether you think that the youth are really mobilized by a lot of these messages, especially relating to nostalgia, which is grounded in historical memory.
Another excellent question, because if we're talking about nostalgia, well, we weren't around, right? So how can we, be lured into something like this? We weren't around. And actually, even in my home country, a survey just yesterday came out that 72% of the Italian public consider itself as anti-fascist, right? So are we only thinking about fairly senior people, right? So in some cases, it is absolutely the case, right? So it is absolutely the case, but they evolve, right? Obviously, we cannot say openly, yeah, let's go to war, because that's what fascism did, right? So let's send 6 million Jews in concentration camps. So that's not going to sit well, right? So in general, what are they doing? They are stealing your identity. You're not working anymore. Even a person like me, right? So I cannot really teach, so back at home, so I have to migrate, essentially, right? I am obviously privileged. So I'm not comparing myself, but so many others. So London is the fifth Italian city, is the fifth major Italian city, right? Because half of the south is in London, because there's no opportunity, there's no job, migration, and all that. See, they're taking your spot. They are replacing you. The elites, those who have studied, and you don't have money to pay for an education, and those who have studies are part of the elite, and they control what you're thinking. And Ken, interestingly, they're using Gramsci, right? So a communist, so who back in the days came out with what we call hegemonic theory. Whoever is in power dictates how you think. And so they're saying this. They say, we are, so the left should do something like this. Your progressive left, wokeism should do this, but they're not. They're part of the system. We are the ones. And so that's where our generation, or your generation, so is more inclined to at least listen to that. And in England, we're seeing that, like we're having an issue in London. I was actually in a talk with the mayor of London, right? So right on this, Islamist, yes, but far right, where? High school. Please.
I started out life in comparative politics in the 60s and early 70s. And my first pass at it was an attempt to do a comparative study of 18 countries on ethnic conflict. And so after getting little brief mini histories, we sent it out to an expert in each of the 18 countries. And one stands out more than others. Val Orwin, who was an expert on Belgium, he wrote the following back, and it was a kind of formula answer that fit all of them. You may be right on the other 17 countries, but on Belgium, you really have a problem. And so the answer, the point was, there was this conflict between detail and generalization. Now that's true for comparative politics from the time of Aristotle up through today. So here's my thought on that. You might do the following, and Larry Bartels, when he was here a few weeks ago, there were a couple countries didn't fit, and he said, well, you have to take their exceptional circumstances into account. So you have your general characteristics, but you could add one more column. Special, really important, unique features of each country that temper the generalization. So be careful, because these three items fit this country and these two items fit that country. And I think that would help a little bit in telling people, well, we want to generalize, but we don't want to sweeping generalize.
Not overgeneralize it. Yeah. No, thank you, Alvin. In fact, so let me walk you back just very quickly. So when I did like when we did like something like this, right? So we said that for the most part, so it's not that in Germany they do not believe, for instance, in Islamophobic narratives, or in particular this group being anti-Semitic, or the protection of the traditional family. For the most part they do, but their thing, right? So, and the thing that really piqued our interest in this particular case was violence. Right? And so that's, what we try to do. So just for one particular country, just focus more like on the particularity, means so that we have seen. But point well taken, right? So because you're right, we cannot.
Well, as you expand this project over time, I also, one other thought, I don't know that you necessarily have to have people go into the countries. I think you can go on the basis of large amounts of existing literature and try your pass. I spent a lot of time in Croatia, and it is an interesting place. And I spent some time in Hungary, not all that much. I spent a lot of time in Italy. And so the more you immerse yourself in there, you see, I'd like to compare it with France, but the Italians aren't the same. And why? So I think that would just give you a chance to do some.
Yes. Alvin, a point well taken, and then I think we have time for one more question. Right? And so,
yes,
go.
I just wanted to ask about what you said about these movements being anti-US and anti-NATO. So when I think about these movements, I don't know that much about them, but I think about them as being anti-EU, but not so much anti-US. So I was wondering whether you could say something about that. Is this something that has evolved over time? Did they just become like this because Putin started paying them?
Very good.
Is there a lot of variation amongst countries? I mean, in France, I would say that the nationalist right has been anti-US for decades.
So in France, I'm sure that like we could probably appreciate that, right? So because France is one of the most important NATO countries, and particularly Marine Le Pen's group, no, they want to do business with Russia, and so it goes like in direct juxtaposition, and so with them, and right, why do we have to pay for something that we don't even consider a threat because they will never invade us? I mean, so that is the rhetoric, right? In Italy, it goes back to the end of the 60s, or probably even World War II. The war is not over, right? And so is in Germany. we're still occupied. We have, in Italy, we have 3 major military bases, and both the far left, actually, which I obviously left out here, and the far right converge here. They stay the same, right? So we're not free. Washington interferes way too much, and we fight wars that we do not want to fight with them. And in fact, it's so interesting because that's actually where you start becoming very anti-American, right? Because they say you control us, we are a colony. So that's what comes out of it. In the United Kingdom, which is so special, so interesting because it's the place of a special relationship, right? So between the two countries. But yet again, why have you dragged us to Iraq? Right? So we should have gone there. Why? Because we're puppets. So even though there's still this special relationship, they don't call it a colony, but definitely a puppet state. And for a hardcore Brit, right? So this doesn't sit well, right? So in fact, they kind of consider America, the other way around, still part of the empire. I know, and I'm not going to say anything more, but one person who hates 4th of July because said, no, I'm not going to celebrate that, right? For this reason, right? So as you can see, there's some variance, right? But probably the common thread which unites everything is control, perceived lack of freedom, and I never call it like slavery, but definitely subjugation to the United States. That's why we can see this anti-American, anti-EU, apologies, anti-American, anti-NATO narrative, in addition to the anti-EU one. I think we're probably up, right?
Yes, we are. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking